now let's get to our main topic today. We are going to talk about home games versus organized play games here on Mastering Dungeons. I, for years and years and years, never played organized play because it wasn't around. And then I just couldn't get into it. I took my break, came back for third edition, and that's all I did was organized play because that was the way I was finding games. And so that led to my career here in role-playing games. And now for the last couple of years, I've been out of it again because I've been focusing all my time with Ghostfire Gaming and getting content created there. So it's been an interesting path for me. What's your experience with organized play and home games?
Sure. So I did just a little touch of it in the third edition days. Going to like a local convention and sitting down and playing some games and wondering why everyone's yelling that why I don't have an RPGA card and, handing me income tax forms that I needed to fill out in order to be able to run a game. And then fourth edition, I got much more involved in organized play programs. I ran games at my local game shops here. I wrote some organized play programs for Wizards of the Coast. There was one called Kill the Wizard. Remember they were doing the encounter program? That was an encounter. Lair Assault. Remember Lair Assault? Yeah. So I got to write, I think I wrote 2 Lair Assaults for Wizards of the Coast, including one that was called Kill the Wizard. Yeah. And of course ran them and played them pretty heavily in the 4th edition days. Then in 5th edition, I started doing organized play stuff in the beginning. I was one of those, kind of not great or local organized play people who was using my organized play game to find good players to bring to my home game.
Sure.
And then ended up liking everybody that I played with so much they became my home game at the store. And we stopped doing, after I think like a couple of seasons, stopped doing the organized part and just said, we're just going to, it was the same people every week. Right. Why don't we just play a campaign, right? We can still play the published campaign, but they weren't dancing from table to table. They were only playing there. The characters were only there. And we were like, well, we'll just stick to that. And I did a little bit of organized play early on in 5th with other groups as well. And I have played in organized play games at conventions and things like that. And also a little bit online ever since and still have done a little bit from here and there. Mm-hmm. But definitely most of my experience in the past 10 years has been doing home games.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what it means to run a home game, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, versus what it means to play organized play. So most home game DMs either create their own adventures and maybe their own house rules, their own way to advance characters. They may create their own adventures. They may use published adventures, but it's their own discrete little section of their own universe that they play in, and nobody crosses that line. Organized play generally uses published adventures, and the walls of the campaign are porous. So you can move from you run or play an organized play campaign at a store. That character, if it follows the rules of this campaign, can then go to a convention and play, as long as it's playing in this organized play setting. Then you can go to a friend's house and play. You could have many different adventuring party compatriots over the years as you move from table to table and have 20 different DMs as you play 20 different adventures. The organizing principle, though, is there is a set of rules on top of the normal game rules that your character and the players and the game masters must abide by in order to make it fair and trackable as you play and then move from place to place. There are some instances in organized play where you can create your own adventure content. There is a program called Dungeon Craft that lets you, for the Adventurers League, create your own campaign. For Oracle of War, we had a way for you to create your own adventures and intersperse them with the published adventures to create a home game feel while still being within the umbrella of organized play. There are many different kinds of organized play programs. Some people play one and they think, oh, all organized play is like Adventurers League. And it's not. You can have different types of campaigns, different ways of tracking things, different ways of adventures being put out. Sometimes it would be just a huge, massive adventure, and you can go in any direction. Sometimes it's a more linear path, etc. But it's that extra set of rules on top that generally differentiates an organized play program from a home game. Whew.
Good description. Yeah.
And anything to add to that?
No, only that my own experience is mostly with Adventures League, right? My experiences with the organized play programs that Wizards of the Coast and their affiliates have been running over the years.
I only say that because I started working in organized play in 2001 with Living Greyhawk, the third edition, sort of main tentpole organized play campaign for Wizards. And I would go to a convention and someone would walk by and say, "What are you doing?" And, "Oh, I'm running Living Greyhawk. It's an RPGA living campaign." And they'd be like, "Oh, RPGA living those are stupid." And I'd be like, "Why?" "Well, back in 1982," I'm like, "Dude, it's 2006."
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still mad. It's been 1982 and I'm still mad.
Right. And so, okay, well, what was bad about it then? And they would list off 5 things that are no longer even have anything to do with organized play. So it changes from time to time, or from campaign to campaign, or from week to week, for better or for worse. But having created in both home game environments and organized play environments, and DM'd in those environments, what do you think, Mike, is the difference for DMs between those two types of play?
Yeah, so I've done both, and obviously most of what I think is interesting about our conversation here is you have done an extensive amount of running games in organized play programs, and I have only done a little bit, right? I've done it here and there, and have done less because of some of the things that I saw when I was running organized play games, which kind of jaded me a little bit. I think that the expectations of the players that are coming to an organized play game are different from what players are expecting when they go to a home game. It's easy to say, like, well, they're expecting a good time, a fun story. They want to see their characters do cool stuff. There are lots of similarities. But I think there's also an expectation about, like, how close you're going to stay to the material that's in the adventure. There's also, I think, more of a character focus that players have, and more of a mechanical focus of their characters, because they know that they're going to be going from different group to different group, and different DM to different DM. So a lot of what happens in the story either is part of the story that they've all experienced because they've all gone through that part of the story, or they're seeing the interesting mechanical things that their character has done because their character has been growing from one adventure to the other, either getting new magic items or leveling up and things like that. So it's different than, like, watching a character's story change, an individual character story change from adventure to adventure, because the only person that would know anything about that story is you, because you're the only one that's been taking it from one DM to one group to one game, on the assumption that you're not playing with, like, a group of players and that group is moving along through an organized play path, which I think can happen, but then that's a lot more like a home campaign.
Like a home campaign, yeah. Yeah, I think it's like everything else, where you can look at tendencies and say, yes, that's a tendency, but doesn't always fit that rule. One of the things I love about organized play as opposed to a home game is I can run an adventure 5 times at a convention or a game day or something over a weekend, and the players love to hear each other's stories. It's not always the case, but it's like, "Oh, did you play the adventure before this? Oh,
yeah.
What did you do?" And it brings that community. Whereas
Right.
if
Right.
you're at a home game, you know the story. I think
Yeah,
right.
Just-
You
it just
know what
happened.
you
We
did
all
last
experienced
week.
it.
Yeah, last week we did this. Whereas this,
Right.
it's like, "Oh, well, we took this other route, and
Right.
this is what happened." Well,
Yeah.
did you have the same fight we did then? No, our fight was different because we went this
Right.
route. So the bad guy didn't have the accomplices, but the bad guy had a dragon instead, right? And
Right.
so, oh yeah, and so that sort of community is something that you would see back in AD&D days before the internet, where people got together. "Oh, you play D&D? Did you play Tomb of Annihilation. That's a little more recent. Tomb of Horrors. Oh yeah,
Right.
what did you stick your head in the thing?
Yeah, you
Oh
put your,
yeah,
put your
yeah,
it
we
didn't
stuck
work
it.
out.
Yeah, Bob stuck his head in the thing, and it was,
He
oh yeah,
doesn't play D&D anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
He quit.
Uh, so that that sort of thing, that community that it builds, is one of the best parts, I think, of organized play. Now there are some drawbacks, obviously. Uh, like you said, you found the players you loved in organized play, and then
Right.
you
Just
brought them,
kept them in a home group. Right.
kept them,
Right.
you hug them close to you, and
Right. We all
and
decided we didn't want to fill out the 1099
yeah,
forms for
right,
experience and loot. Yeah.
yep, and yeah, and so that's the whole thing. So in terms of DMing skills, anything that you, as a organized play DM, that you learned, that you got better at because you were DMing in this arena rather than for a home game?
Things that I learned, yeah. So there are a couple things that both seeing people running organized play games and running them myself that I brought over that I think works is one is about pacing. Like I think now some of this could be because most of the organized play games I played are at conventions, and conventions have very strict schedules, and like you better hammer out your adventure in the 4-hour time block that you've got, because other group is going to be sitting at your table right then.
Right.
That having that, it's sort of like working as a reporter in a newspaper. You don't have time to worry about whether you can write or not. Like you're writing, like you better get those words out because the paper's going out. And that same kind of idea of like, if you're a DM that I think, and I've seen plenty of people who weren't particularly good at it, that if you're a DM who regularly plays in those timed events, you better get good about timing and pacing and moving things forward and keeping track of time. And in my opinion, the best ones know how to make an adventure fit the time that you've got, even as it's taking weird paths, and still have a good, satisfying conclusion. Yeah. And that's one that I've seen lots of DMs who aren't particularly good at it, where they run what I refer to as the boring middle, and then cut the end short. Yeah. Right. And you're like, there was a good arc in there. And instead we spent a time doing skill challenges across the swamp. Right. And rolling checks to see whether we were losing our boots in the mud. And then we were going to fight a dragon at the end, and like, well, we're going to call it right here. We'll just say you guys beat the dragon. And you're like, why'd you keep the mud boot part and cut the dragon part? So I think that's
this game is Dungeons and Dragons, not Dungeons and Dragons,
not
losing boot
sucking.
swap.
Right. So I think that's something that organized play DMs can pick up. Obviously, another big one is just learning all of the different ways to engage with so many different kinds of players. That's that players many, and I think you and I have had Twitter arguments about this long ago, about the player archetypes, right? And there's so many variants of those archetypes that actually seeing them play at the table and knowing what kind of different players bring, and then figuring out how to engage with them, well, then you can bring those same kind of tricks that worked well to engage different players who wanted different things to your home group, if they fit that model too, right? Yeah. Now, the opposite is also true, though, where and I was talking to David Christ about this, who runs Baldwin Games. You and I both know David. And he brought up a good point. He's like, there are some DMs who are fantastic at home games and terrible at organized play games, right? That the skill set is different enough that that they can be kicked out of the program. Right? It's like, I played in their home games. They're freaking awesome, but we're not letting them run games for folks at a convention. Yeah. And, because the skill set can be so different, and knowing your players and your players knowing you, and that sort of synergy that you have with this one like tight, cohesive little group is very different when you have different people coming to the table. And that's something where like I've had personal experience that drew me away from DMing, where like I ran organized play games. I had 2 instances where I ran organized play programs. One was running Wasp Mine of Fandelver, the starter set adventure to 5th edition. And I changed out the spells that one of the NPCs had, and I had the spellcaster throw a web out instead of hold person or whatever, because I'm like, hold person sucks and web is good, so I'm gonna use web. And one of the players is like, you're not playing the mod, right? Like that's not what the mod says. The mod says that he's got hold person, and you're just arbitrarily changing spells. And I'm like, no, I'm role playing the NPC who knows why web is better than hold person, right? Right. And I was like, hey, like if you want to play the mod, you can get an Excel spreadsheet, right? Like you don't need me, right? And so it kind of turned me off, right? The idea that like, if you were and it also turned me off that the dude knew what spell lineup the NPC had, right?
Yeah.
It was like, you've been through this before, so much so that,
Yeah.
so that, and that's where I feel like, and I'm picking one player and using that as a model for all organized play players,
Yeah.
100,000 organized play players. But I do think that there definitely is a sense. I've seen this also on the other side of playing it, that there are players who are like, they expect that when they've had the experience of going through that module, that they've had that experience, and they don't want it to vary too much, that they can't have that conversation with someone else. And they say, well, we went on this whole different thing because the DM just took it off in this whole other path, and we never even saw that stuff that you talked about, right? Like, they generally want it to be following. And I think that like the organized play, the groups that are running it are hoping that everybody is having a shared experience. And you can only have that shared experience if at least the big parts of it
Right.
are following along the lines, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, those are a couple of thoughts on it.
This is probably more terrifying a comparison than it should be, but sometimes being an organized play DM in terms of going out and DMing for strangers is like being a substitute teacher at a high school, where you don't know what you're getting into. You don't
Right, you don't know the kids. They don't know you.
They don't know you. You don't have that rapport
Right.
yet. You're walking in, but you need to finish. You need to do a thing.
You haven't it right. You have a thing, right?
The teacher has left lesson plans, and you need to get through them. And at the end of class, you have to have taught this thing, have the students have done this thing. So you need to walk into this lion's den and come out the other side. Now, generally the students are more cooperative in organized play, right? They're generally better behaved.
They'll generally they want to sit there and have a good time.
Better behaved, right?
Yeah.
They're not trapped there. They chose to be here.
Right. In many cases, paid money to be there.
Exactly. So in that case, since it's different, but a lot of the tools, I always go back to teaching in terms of being a good DM, because a good DM has to do a lot of things that a teacher has to do. In terms of looking at all the people in the room, right? Going from person to person, making sure you're talking to everyone, not favoring one person over another, recognizing the needs of certain people as opposed to the needs of others. Using those people and using those traits to be able to help everyone. So talk about pacing, right? If you have somebody who loves to role play and may drone on a bit and slow the game down versus the person who is get it done person, right? You can use this person to add flavor to the game, but then when it's time to get something done, you focus your attention over here, and that person moves the game along, and generally people will then follow. So it's those sorts of skills that you learn when you play with a bunch of different people in a bunch of different settings, maybe even with a bunch of different game rules. I was running, not organized play, but a convention of Star Trek Adventures last week at Origins. Completely different rule set, but a lot of the same tools that you use for game mastering one transfer to game mastering the other. So that's important. We've been talking about different skills, and we've been getting into the topic of where do the skills match up for DMs of home play versus organized play. Anything you want to mention on that?
No, I think I've hit it.
Yeah. You have a note here about being a fan of the players.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. So there are definitely areas where I think where the skills definitely overlap between the two, and I think that's a big one. And this is one where I've seen DMs who are definitely more of a competitive DM running organized play. I've also seen competitive DMs that are running home groups versus the ones that are definitely like there to help your character look awesome, right? Those that are really like recognize the fact that the main characters of the story are the player characters. Yeah. And focusing on that. And I think that that's something both groups can definitely pick up. Even if you're staying true to an organized play adventure and trying to make sure that you're sticking to the main experience that's in that adventure, still putting the characters in positions where they can navigate it in a cool way is better than letting them get stuck in mud that requires 4 squares of movement per square in order to move out of it, right? And gotchas. A big one is like gotchas, right? Like DMs who are super excited when you trigger their trap and die versus those that are like giving you information your character would know to avoid, or to at least recognize what the challenge is if the character would know it, right? This is a big one that I talk about, which is like half the time players aren't hearing what a DM is talking about, right? Like half the time players aren't understanding what you're saying.
Right.
And so if the character would know it, don't hide it. Right?
Yeah.
Like if the character would see it, if the character's right, the character's life is actually at risk and they're actually professionals and you're not, right? You're just some dude sitting there with your phone in your hand. So, tell them the things that are important.
Yeah.
I think those are good, those are good traits that I think both organized play DMs and home DMs can definitely pick up and reinforce whether you're one or the other.
Yeah. So what can organized play games learn from home games then? I think the best organized play campaigns do what they can to feel like home games while still maintaining the structure that's necessary to hold up the campaign. And sometimes the campaign grows too large and you lose that home game feel, as you were talking about, Mike, filling out a tax form at the end of each game to not only see how much gold and experience and magic and favors and boons and time units and whatever the campaign has. Not just that, but also putting your RPGA number and being trackable and putting, having your card and doing all of those things. And
I think that's gotten a lot better too, right? Like now we're down to like a 1099 easy,
yeah,
right? Where
yeah,
you're just,
pretty much.
It's much simpler than it used to be.
And that comes from years of lessons. That comes from years of failing to understand that standard and failing to understand that there are people who gravitate toward that. And so they don't complain because they love the paperwork. And there's not, if you do, that's fine. But you always have to recognize that there are people there that want to play and maybe jot down, oh, I gained a level. And that's as much as they want to track, right? Anything they write on their character sheet is all they want to do. They don't want forms. They don't want all of that. And there's probably room for both kinds of campaigns, but then you're splitting a campaign, right? There's room for this ultra accounting heavy tracking, and then you gain a level and you gain 200 gold pieces, and if you want this magic item, you've got it. Boom,
right.
We're done.
Right.
But there does need to be some support to help people understand the campaign itself that they're in, even the story facets of it, to remember they may have played one adventure and 3 months later they play the next adventure in our series. They may need to be reminded of what they did last time. So having something in place that allows that can be handy too.
That is something that home games can learn. I've definitely had some home games where like you gain 2,800 gold as a party and they're like, hey, does anybody remember how much gold you have? Like, oh no, I thought you were keeping track. I don't know how much gold you have. You're like, we're level 8. Like you've been getting gold for a long time. And I'm not going to tell you how much gold you have. I have no idea either. Like, nobody kept track of our gold. We know we have some, but we don't know where it is.
And that's one thing that
maybe they need a 1099.
Yeah, well, it's not even a 1099, right? Maybe it's half a sheet of paper at the end of each adventure that shows what you did and what you got. And I think Baldman Games was doing that with their Moonshea Isles adventures for a while. Was here's a quarter or a half sheet of paper. This is what you did. This is what you earned.
Yeah, that's nice.
If you want to throw it out, fine. But if you just put it with your character
you
sheet,
did receive it. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we've sort of learned, we being the organized play community, we've learned what works, what doesn't, what might be too much, what might be not enough, and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken a one of those outside rules, one of those paperwork things from organized play and used it in your home game or thought about using it in your home game?
No, I mean, I now have a player who's keeping a Google Sheets to track treasure and gold after they realized they had probably lost tens of thousands of gold because nobody bothered to keep track. For a little while, I was handling, I think this is kind of more in the other direction where like when organized play was handling experience points as the default, and we generally figured out, well, yeah, but like there's an expectation of how fast people are leveling anyway. So we'll just take whatever those experience points are, divide them by the number of sessions, and that's how many you get. And I'm not going to bother to figure out like per monster, how much experience they had. I don't know that there's any other. Yeah, like the writing down of magic items, right? Like organized play and Adventures League. I presume they still have them, right? Like the cards that have like fancy magic item descriptions on them. Remember those things?
The
people
certs,
have binders full of the cards.
like
Yeah, the certs.
The certs, yeah.
Yeah. I have one that's unique. I have one that there's only one of in the world, and I've got it. I think you gave it to me, or somebody.
It's quite possible.
Was it the Sararak killing folk?
I think so. Yeah.
And you announced it from the balcony at Origins. Yeah. I was the first character killed by a Sararak.
That's true.
And there's one card.
Yeah.
Available. I still have it. There's one card for the first person to get killed and have their soul stolen by a Sararak, and that was me.
That's you.
So those cards matter, and like that idea of putting magic items on cards and describing what they have, and then at the table being able to hand somebody a card that says, "Here's this +2 sword," is a really good. It's a fun way to make something feel real. It's worth the energy to write it out and give it to somebody.
Yeah, in the box sets that they put out now, Wizards, right? They have the cards with the magic items on them. So it is nice to hold that something in your hand. As a creator, this isn't even on our sheet, but as a creator, you've written for organized play, you've written for everyone else, you've written for home groups. Any thoughts on that process? Any thoughts on?
I'm much happier writing for home groups. Yeah. And so I'm much happier writing my own things. I have two, like for organized play adventures for 5th edition. I have 2 adventures that are up on the DM's Guild. Drowned Tower and The Innocent, I think, are the 2 for I think season 3, 2. I don't even remember, season 2 and season 4 or something like that. And the tricky bit with those, I was younger and less experienced in writing kind of adventures like this. But there was also sort of like the framework that you had to write the adventure in, that you knew that you were one component of this. I think we had this conversation about how writing for, I think, season 4, which was the Curse of Strahd season for Adventurers League, that there was like, their plan was to have like a whole campaign. And I think that has now changed to sort of like, like a trio, right? Like 3 adventures that kind of fill it out because they figured out that trying to, players couldn't go through the whole campaign and figure it out. And remember, they had these like weird hooks that would lead into the adventure and weird hooks that would lead out of the adventure, and then some theme, and then you had to write and make it all make sense. And that was really, it was really hard to do, right? It was really hard to, and then like you look at the criticism, and the criticism is all about the stuff that you were given, like, I don't know why, I saw something like, I don't know why Yuanti have anything to do with frickin' Ravenloft. And you're like, well, because they told me Yuanti had to be in it, right? Like, they're like, you can write anything you want, but it better have Yuanti. So, so there were definitely like, you sort of had a bunch of different masters when you're writing an organized play adventure, and it's different. Now, a difference is like I'm comparing that to self-publishing adventures where I have only one boss and it's just me, and I can just write it and it could suck and I could put it out there and it sucks, right? But at least I only have one. There's only one person's directions, other than maybe I have, ideally 10,000 bosses of all the people that are going to buy this adventure and then run it. But at least I can focus it, and I don't have to worry about, sort of other aspects. I can, if the loot makes sense for the adventure, I can put the loot in there. I don't have to worry if there's some, sort of framework for loot for the rest of the campaign that it has to fit into. I don't know that there's any other, writing some organized play adventures taught me a lot. One that taught me a ton was Vault of the Dracolich, which I wrote with my partners Teos and Scott Fitzgerald Gray. Right, we were all introduced to each other in our semi-professional capacity, professional for them, semi-professional for me, about writing that adventure. And that was right between fourth and fifth edition. And I remember like designing the map for that, and it was very linear. It was like a spider web with like a hub and like a bunch of paths that would go in because it was a multi-group adventure. And I remember Greg Bilsland, who was the Wizards of the Coast producers, like, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. You can't do it like that. It's, you know, and I'm like, what? You know, how are they supposed to play this thing if it's not like 5 scenes, right? Like they can go anywhere. What do you mean they can go anywhere? And so that taught me a lot about like what now we kind of refer to as J-quasing the dungeon, the idea of like multiple paths and multiple layers and elevation changes and loopbacks and secret passages and all sorts of other things that make a non-linear layout. Was something that I learned there, and you know, Scott and Teos were instrumental in helping break my brain about, you know, how to think about adventures like that. Mostly because fourth edition was so regimented in how that style of play worked. Like
Right.
you knew you're only getting like 3 scenes, maybe 3 battles, you know, 2 to 3 battles in a adventure.
Right.
So, you know, and fifth isn't like that, you know. So it was getting that change took me some effort.
Yeah.
And had to do with like writing an organized play adventure like that for you know, one of the first ones.
Yeah, I remember working on Halls of Undermountain, and that was at the end of fourth edition where they were trying to get people ready for a new way of playing. And they're like, okay, we want you to make this fourth edition Undermountain adventure, but don't do it like we've been doing it. Do it like an old school
Right.
D&D dungeon. And I'm like, but the encounters and the rests and the daily powers.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. Like
and
it's going to
like,
change everything.
Okay, here we go. Let's see what we can come up with.
Right,
So,
right. And
it
I never had any experience because my only writing for role playing games started with fourth edition. I didn't write anything for third. So, and I certainly didn't write, other than my own homebrew adventures, anything, you know, previous to that. And looking at how fifth feels like second edition a lot of times. Well, I didn't have any experience with that, and I'd been learning that now for the past, you know, 10 years while this system has been out, and I love it. Like I'm happier writing adventures now than I've ever been. But it, you know, it took me time to figure that out and to break past the mold that fourth edition had kind of wired into my brain.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other thoughts on this before we wrap up our show today?
I had like my little quippy statement of like, if you're running games for your friends at home and they're all loving it and you're all loving it, doesn't matter like how you would do in an organized play setting.
Yeah.
And I brought up David Christ's anecdote about the, you know, a guy who was, yeah, and there might be another story here that I don't know, but somebody who was removed from playing in organized play games, who apparently was awesome playing for home games.
Yeah. I mean,
And
yeah. If you're good, if you're having fun with your friends and they're telling you you're a great DM, guess what? You're a great DM.
you are, yeah, right. Like no one else gets to decide that for anybody.
Right.
This is always my favorite. Like whenever back when, like, you know, there was social media, that you know, it was always like the world's best DMs are here. You know, there was a time at Wizards of the Coast where their community managers were like, all the best DMs are here. And I'm like, that seems statistically unlikely.
Yes.
Because I'm pretty sure there's somewhere where there's a best DM that's in a basement with 4 other people. We have no idea who it is. They're not streaming their game. They're not posting pictures on Twitter. They're just enjoying their game. And their players are happier than everyone else in the world of RPGs.
Exactly. And what makes a great DM? It changes from table to table.
Sure,
For some people,
yeah.
the great DM is the person who has the terrain all set up and all the player handouts and all the props. For some people, it's the person who can make the best jokes while in character and
Or improv the whole thing with a single 3x5 card.
exactly, and everything in between. So if you're a DM and your players are having fun, rock on. You keep doing what you're doing. If you want to learn different skills, if you want to see
different player types.
see how the other half
For different
games.
players.
Yeah, go to a game store during Free RPG Month, or Free RPG Weekend, which just happened, or go run an organized player. Sit down with a group of strangers and play. See what the other DMs are like. That's one of the ways you can learn. So, Mike, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to give us some news, and then I'm going to ask you where people can find you. So hang in there for just a second, because we want to thank our patrons. We want to thank our Master of Dungeon supporters, our Master of Realm supporters. In our show notes, we give you a thanks, and our Masters of the Multiverse, well, you're going to hear right now about Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Krishna, I don't know how to say, Simone Say, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Falcon Neal, Shawn Molly, The Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, The Mathemagician, Chad Lench, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, Seth Eckel, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you so much. You can become a supporter of the show by going to mastering DND. You can also find us on YouTube if you want to see Mike and my beautiful face. Mike, where can people find you and your work out there on the internet?
You can find all of my stuff at slyflourish.com. You can join my newsletter, subscribe to my podcast, watch my videos, join my Patreon, or buy a book, all at the same website.
Sweet. You can find me on Twitter at Sean Merwin until the site implodes. You can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D.
Happened a couple of days ago, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Mastering D&D on Twitter as well. Also Mastering D&D on Mastodon at Dice Camp. Better yet, just join our Patreon. And you can ask us questions and join our community. We have the Discord server where we have incredible discussions each and every day. And then you can also leave comments on the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. So, Mike, we have just recorded a show. What are we going to do now?
We're going to build some awesome monsters and TPK some adventurers.
Using Forge of Foes.
Oh, yeah, using Forge of Foes. Where
Rock
else?
on.